Scene graph. What is scene graph? Scene graph is a unified structure that connects all the objects in the world. Think of it as a toolbox that contains. It's a tool that will be good one day, but for now it crashes a ton and has a lot of issues, which is why no one does tutorials on it. Only a few people have a really good understanding of scene graph, like Sprinter, who made a literal API for it. I barely know what API stands for. But because my game Magic Heroes uses scene graph, you guys asked me to create a tutorial on it, so here we are. Scene graph works with entities and components. Basically, you have your prefab or your entity, and you get to define what components you want your prefab to have so that you can edit and manipulate it how you want. For example, here we have an entity with a mesh component, and later we can write in verse how to edit our mesh component. Epic has been talking about scene graph for a while to the community and even showed off how much better it's going to be compared to how verse currently works. You see, with verse, you would have your manager for your objects so that you can manipulate your array of objects. But with scene graph, it makes it way easier because the scene graph entity is manipulating itself, and you're able to change each individual object without going through an array of objects. For example, at Unreal Fest, they showed a demo of how animations used to work and how simple animations are going to be with scene graph.
So we have this prefab here for moving platforms, and we drag it out into the level. Oh, that's it.
But they didn't show how to actually do it. Like they just showed how it working, and I'm not mad. Anyways, I'm gonna be teaching you all about simple animations in scene graph. We're gonna be animating objects like these. Fair warning, I don't know how to make the player move side to side with the object. If anyone knows, drop a comment and I'll pin it if it works. To animate a mesh with scene graph, we need a model. So I made a cube with the modeling tool, and it needs collision. So I added a box collision to it with these collision settings, and I wanted to move based off of the center of the box. So using the modeling mode, we put the pivot point in the center. Next, we create a prefab by right-clicking on our content drawer and creating new prefab. We want to add our mesh component, but you'll notice your mesh isn't there. You have to build verse code. You see, scene graph finds its components based off of the assets.digest folder, so you have to build verse code in order to see your new components. If you're not using the hotkey Control-Shift-B to build verse code, I'm gonna crash out. So now we have our mesh component in scene graph, and it is time for the dreaded verse. Before we hop into that, we need to understand how animations work with scene graph. You see, scene graph uses keyframes to animate the mesh you want, but the keyframes are additive, meaning if you put X at 500, it will not go to the world space 500, it will add 500 to its current X. So if your current cube is at X 1000, and you put 100 as your X translation keyframe, it will move the mesh to 1100, not 100. And to get keyframes working, all we need to do is add a keyframe movement component to our entity. Now we can begin our verse script. We're going to create a new verse component. We're met with this stuff, and I just deleted all except for on simulate. There's a couple ways to do our animation. For example, my orbs in Magic Heroes use a linear raycast to find the ground, and when I get that transform, I pass in the transform to the animation function that looks like this. However, if we're making something simple, like these movable parkour blocks, we can literally make an editable for our array of keyframes. Then we make an editable for keyframe mode, so that we can loop the animation if we would like. These are the different keyframe movement playback mode. I just control clicked to be able to see which one we wanted to define. In our case, we did ping pong for a loop. Now we need to create an animation function. So we're gonna create a suspense function because at the end of our function, we're gonna make it wait for the animation to finish. Now using our if statement, we're defining our entity and getting the component using entity.getComponent bracket. And in this case, keyframe movement component is the component we're trying to grab. So now that we have it defined, now we are able to set our keyframes using our editable array of keyframe movement deltas and our editable of keyframe mode to define the keyframe mode. Then we're gonna play the keyframes, and then we're gonna wait for the keyframes to finish playing using our .await function as shown. And all we need to do is throw it into onSimulate, which is basically our onBegin. Next, we just build verse code, and we could create our keyframes, like making these two move up and down, or making this one rotate, and it looks just like this. Now, if you didn't know, onSimulate means while the session is running, so when the simulation of the session begins. Now that means even when your game hasn't started by clicking the start round, it's going to be running the simulation. So if you don't want it to do that and you only want it to run when you start a game, we can actually do this. We have access to Fortnite's round begin, round end system in Scene Graph, and we could type this code so we could get the entity's Fort round manager and then subscribe round started with our function in order to have our animation only start when the game is actually started. And we could add a logic variable for is always enabled. So for some of them, if you want it to always run, it will. And then if you want others to only run when the round begins, you can. And now you have basic animation with Scene Graph, and it's super customizable. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and feel free to suggest what you would like to learn next with Scene Graph.